People should mute themselves.
Yeah, let me mute.
Dear beloved mother.
All right, good morning, good Erev Shabbos, everybody. We read a lot in the papers about people in public office who don't always tell the truth. One member of Congress may be expelled today in an historic vote. And I thought I would discuss what is the halacha or the ethics involved in lying or bending the truth. Is it ever permissible, and if so, under what circumstances? The Torah states very, very clearly in Shmos, Chav Gimel Pasuk Zayin, Midvar Sheker Tirchok. You should distance yourself from any falsehood. So what exactly does that imply? What are the limits? And what does it mean, really? Now, the Gemara in Shavuos is a whole long discussion about it, and it presents a number of situations where people can violate this pasuk, is how mitzvah in the Torah of midvar sheker tircha. If you're sitting at a din Torah, for example, and if you see an angle that the dayanim may have missed, and you don't say anything about it, you violate midvar sheker tircha. So that's within a judicial setting. If a person is listening to a shiur and he sees that the Rabbi may have made a mistake, and he waits to tell him in such a way that the whole shiur has to be reconstructed. In other words, he gets all the kavod, so to speak. You violated midvar sheker tircha. You've done something with an ulterior motive, which is inappropriate. If you owe somebody $100, and you can't claim that, he can't claim that if somebody owes you $100, you can't claim that he owes you $200. But you can negotiate down a little bit. That's also midvar sheker tircha. Very limited circumstances. Basically, the Gemara is telling you, don't lie, don't distort the truth. However, we have a very famous Gemara in Ksubos. Everybody knows when you go to a wedding, everybody sings Kesa Merak Nifnei Kala Kala Noava Chasuda. What a beautiful bride this is. Well, some brides are more attractive than others. And this is a machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. And Beis Shammai says, talk about her midos, talk about her personality, but if she's not good looking, don't say she's good looking. Not every bride is good looking. And that's a violation of midvar sheker tirchak. Everybody sees her sitting there. They know that whether she's attractive or not. So you're lying, basically, when you say kala noava chasuda. Beis Hillel, whom we follow, basically says that every bride is beautiful, just by definition. And therefore we follow Beis Hillel, and we all dance around the kala saying, kala noava chasuda, what a beautiful bride this is. So the conclusion of the Gemara in similar situations is that it may be permissible to, I wouldn't say lie, but to not tell the truth for the sake of peace, for the sake of shalom, to promote positive feelings, not to hurt somebody. And this is pretty much what most poskim would follow, except there are a lot of very detailed distinctions. For example, everybody who studied Bav Mitzvah, Eila Mitzvah, when you find a lost object, so how do you reclaim your lost object? So you have to give simanim. You have to describe it in great detail to know that it's your lost object. Somebody posts on a bulletin board, I found a diamond ring. Will the owner please come collect it? A lot of people say, well, it's a diamond ring, so let me go get it. But then you have to describe what the diamond looks like. How many carats? Are there things on the side? Is it kind of band? Whatever it is. You have to give simanim. That's the halacha. But the halacha also says if you are a Talmud Chacham, you are believed. You don't have to go through all the rigmarole of giving simanim. Identify the object, because it assumes that a Talmud Chacham would never lie. And Gemara there goes into more detail, and it says there are three situations where you might be able to lie or not tell the whole truth. Maseches, Puria, Ushpiza. What are these three things? So Rashi explains that if somebody asks somebody, did you learn a certain Masechta? And out of modesty, the person may say no. You're allowed to be modest and not say, oh, I don't know everything. So you can say, I didn't learn that. That's humility. When you ask questions about personal intimacy, you don't have to discuss that in detail. That's inappropriate. And again, not tell the truth all the time. And also the last category, fascinating category, is ushpiza, concerning hospitality. Let's say you visited a certain community and you stayed by a certain individual, and they asked you, how was your stay? Oh, it was wonderful. They had a beautiful room. There were flowers. They put out coffee and cake. You rave and rave and rave to the point that every time somebody goes to that town, they're going to ask to stay at this person's house. So you're allowed to say it was okay, because you don't want to cause undue difficulty to somebody else. So those are the three cases the Gemara above Mitzvah says that you're allowed not to tell the whole truth. So you have basically two approaches in lying. Basically, you can't tell an actual lie, and you shouldn't be a passive participant in any type of dishonesty. But there are certain situations where you may be able to bend it a little bit. Again, to protect somebody, to prevent embarrassment, things of that sort. Basically, the Mefarshim, the Rishonim, basically say that the value of peace overrides the prohibition of midvar sheker tirchak, which is a radical statement to make. How you can take a pasuk in the Torah and say, yeah, it applies except in these cases. But that's what the Rishonim do. Again, everybody does agree that in cases of shalom, you're allowed to bend it a little bit. It's only prohibited. You can't lie if it's going to cause somebody to get hurt or damaged in the process. The Gemara in Shavuos, which talks about midvar sheker tirchak, talks about people losing money in a court case and things of that sort. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai talks about embarrassing a colleague. And also, it would also reflect poorly on the husband. You say, why did he marry such an ugly woman? So one has to balance the goals of what you're trying to accomplish against this prohibition against staying away from any types of falsehood. The Rambam, interesting enough, Pasnas lahalacha, the Gemara says a Talmid Chacham doesn't have to give simanim to claim a lost object. The Rambam goes one step further and says anybody who has a reputation for never lying is an honest person, even though it may not be a Talmid Chacham. If they darkei shalom, you're allowed to return the object without requiring the detailed identification, because he's known to be an honest person. Now, it's interesting that there are two places where the Rambam talks about honesty. One is in Hilchos Deos, which is more of a philosophical approach, and the other one is Hilchos Aveda, which is a halachic approach. And the Rav Soloveitchik explains this to show that when he talks about it in the Hilchos Deos, it means it's not really a prohibition, rather a value, a midah, to speak truthfully about all cases. Which he says in Hilchos Deos, in Hilchos Aveda, he talks about promoting peace, and he kind of balances the two. It's interesting because they wrestle with these two approaches. How do you modify a biblical prohibition? The Novominsker Rebbe, the previous Novominsker Rebbe, Ruch official, said that the halacha of midvar sheker tirchak only applies in a judicial proceeding, in terms of dayanim and eidim, and that's where he interprets the various Gemaras when it talks about hurting people or causing damage or loss. That's where it applies in a Beis Din setting. Okay, these are the theoretical positions of the Rishonim and Achronim. What are the practical applications here? When can you bend the truth, so to speak, in contemporary situations. Fascinating story in the Gemara about Rav, the great Amora Rav, who, for some reason, his wife had a shtick that whenever he would ask for one thing for supper, she'd give him something else. If he would ask for corn, she would give him rice. If he would ask for rice, she'd give him corn. The Gemara doesn't explain why she did this. Maybe she has some interesting mental imbalance, whatever it may have been. This is what she did. I don't know if it was spite or whatever it may have been. This is what he asked for A, she gave him B. All right. So when his son Rabbi got older, he figured out this behavior of his mother, and when she would ask him, "What do you want to eat?" if he would say A, he would tell the mother B, so she'd give him A, which is what he really wanted. And when Rav found out about it, so he praised Reb Chia's wisdom in giving what he wanted to eat, but he said, it's really not right, not nice to lie to your mother. So that was one, practical case in the Gemara. It also, of course, another pasuk, Limdu Lashona and Dvar Sheker. You shouldn't teach children to prevaricate, to distort the truth. The Gemara, again, is a practical advice. Never promise a child something and not give it to him, because you're basically teaching a child that it's okay sometimes to lie. If you promise a child you're going to do something or give him something or her, then you have to do it. Just because they're a child doesn't mean it changes the halach. Okay. Let's see. Halacha l'maaseh, interesting one that's brought down in the halachic sfarim. You want a child who's capable to learn how to do the mitzvah of lulav. So you give a child a lulav, an esrog, what they call these chinuch sets, which are based, they're still kosher, they're just not as fancy as the other ones. And he can do his mitzvah with them. What if, as was the case in yesteryear, when not everybody had a lulav and esrog, we know that you can't give a child a lulav and esrog on the first day of Yontif, of Sukkot, because the Torah says, "L'kaktem lochem," it has to be yours, and a child does not have the legal capacity of acquiring and transferring ownership. So once you give it to a child, that belongs to the kid, and you can't take it back to do the mitzvah. It's a problem with parents and children on the first day of Sukkot. Have to be very careful about that. However, what if he had in his mind that he was giving it to him as a gift? He's giving it to him as a gift in his mind, but not really giving it to him as a gift. In other words, it was a transactional conception in his mind. Basically, it's a legal fiction in order to allow the child to do the mitzvah in such a way that the father can still use lulav and esrog. But again, we try not to do that because we don't want to teach the child that we can use this type of shtick, this type of trick in normal transactions either. So basically, that's why you should buy a child his own lulav and esrog whenever possible. But basically, when it comes to children, the position of the halacha is that we have to be much more careful because children pick up on things. They're very, very sensitive. And the rules of lying and bending the truth apply even more carefully when you're dealing with children. What about business? Are you ever allowed to lie in business? Again, even if there's no technical loss to somebody else, lying is prohibited, basically, because it's a form of geneva or genevas das in many cases. If you back out of an oral agreement, that's a violation of several things. Not only is it a question of lying, some poskim hold that it's, in the end of Kiseitse, when it talks about Ephod Tzedek, Vehin Tzedek, having honest weights and measures, backing out of an oral agreement can be traced back to that halacha as well. And the Rambam says very clearly, if your word is not worth anything, if you say one thing and do another, achas papev, yachas palev. So it's interesting, the language that he uses is, ein ruach chachamim nocha himen. The chachamim will look upon this in a very negative way. It would have been stronger if he said it's usher, it's prohibited, but it doesn't. He says, you shouldn't do it. It's not right, and people will not think well of you, especially the chachamim. And again, Rav Soloveitchik again comments on the Rambam's approach is a little bit different in Hilchos Deos as it is in Hilchos Mechira. Different concepts governed by different rules. One is a value-based one is practical halacha. And in both cases, it comes out against basically being dishonest. However, there are certain circumstances which are very gray areas for bending the truth. Let's say I had a document and I lost it. Can I forge a second document, which is the same thing? The other person doesn't know that I lost it, or whether it's an I or U. Can that be done? And again, if there's no harm to anybody, no harm, no foul, it might be permissible. You obviously can't claim more than is owed to you, but you have there are practical cases came up. Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, a contemporary posek from Israel, who says that, let's say somebody lost their monthly bus pass. Can I borrow somebody else's bus pass to go on the bus? I had a bus pass. I paid for the bus pass. My friend is willing to lend me his bus pass, even though it's one less pass deducted from the amount that I'm allowed. So clearly he says this does not violate midvar sheker tircha because you already paid for it anyway. So that's a practical application which came up. Again, it's not within the context of a bezdin either, so that takes care of that issue. What about endorsing a check? If somebody forgot to endorse a check, can you endorse it for him? And knowing that he would have wanted to do this. Now, it's not clear whose name you're signing on the check. If it's made out of cash and you sign your own name, that's similar to the bus pass case. If you're signing someone else's name, then in the context of business, that might be more questionable. But these are contemporary issues that come up in terms of, I mean, if it's black and white, you can't do it. But in gray areas, there are there's some wiggle room. Interesting, in terms of verbal comments that people make, there are some, the author of the Steich Emet, the great encyclopedia of halacha, says he was very careful not to exaggerate praises for Talmidei Chachamim. Today, when you write, every rabbi, every rebbe is Harav, Hagon, Ha'olov, all these titles. So he didn't want to go overboard because he felt it was inappropriate. However, it was pointed out to him that if you don't do it, then people might think less of a particular rabbi being addressed. It's an unfortunate occurrence. Today, you see pictures in the various Jewish papers of rabbis who are rebbeim in different yeshivos, and everyone is Harav, Hagodol, Hagaon, etc., etc., etc. When those titles should be reserved for the really, the outstanding Gedolei Hador. So exaggerating, praising effusively, these might fall into the category of midvar sheker tirchak as well. There's a famous story that Rav Soloveitchik used to tell about Rabbi Chorif. I think he was a distant relative. Anyhow, he complained to Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, the Brisker Rav, about the Noda B'Yehuda, a previous generation, a great gadol. He said the Noda B'Yehuda praised a certain sefer, which caused Rabbi Chorif to buy it. He bought the sefer, And he didn't like it. It's a waste of money. So he complained to Reb Chaim, why did the Note of Yehuda praise this Sefer when I didn't find anything, wasn't that great? So Reb Chaim says to him, go back to the Sefer again, and there's one essay in that Sefer that makes the whole book worthwhile. Rabbi Yudin often says, it's worth buying this book just for this alone. And it's the same thing here. So you can praise people, but people have to be careful in the words that they use. The bottom line of all this is that one shouldn't lie, period. Stay away from any type of falsehoods, misrepresentations, especially when it's going to harm somebody. Effusive praise of people can sometimes also have a negative effect. You praise somebody to get into their good graces. Maybe they'll do you a favor down the road. One has to be careful, as Rabbi Yudin very often will say, you have to be as careful with what comes out of your mouth as what comes into your mouth, which is very, very true. Clearly, to promote shalom, to promote peace, whether it's in a family situation, whether it's in negotiations with nations, whatever it might be, whenever you're in a position to do something, one should be very careful in the language that you use and the actions that you take to prevent any misrepresentation or any falsehood. But if the purpose is to promote well-being and happiness and simcha and shalom, then as we say at a wedding about the bride, then it might be permissible. But in business dealings, and certainly within a bezdin situation, one has to be very, very careful with what he says. And in the modern world, where there are so many ways to get around things, and a way you can say things and misrepresent, it's even more of a crucial halacha to remember. So midvat sheker tirchak is a very important myth. Yes.
In the shidduchim world, there's so much lying going on. Which is ridiculous. You're hurting the potential college cousin, but they don't realize.
So this happens very often when people, the whole shidduch world today is a crazy world. People do not go out to have a good time. People go out to get married, and it's not really going out. It's just really learning more about that person, whether it's a good match or not. What happens? You get a phone call from somebody, and they want to know about so-and-so. What can you tell me about this person? And you happen to know some negative things about that person that would not be good in any marriage to anybody. This guy is, he may have psychological problems. He may have other issues. He may have been convicted on money law, whatever it may have been. Negative information. Can you give that negative information to the person that calls you, knowing full well that it will be oishirach? They're not going to, and the truth is, and the shiloh has been asked, and the psak is yes, you must tell them, because otherwise they wind up with divorce. And this happens I know of a case of when I was a principal. I had a lovely young lady from Muncie who got married at the age of 18 to a fellow who was mentally unbalanced. And during the week of Sheva Bracha, she ran home to her mother. So this was a mistake. I never should have done it. Blah blah blah. Now what happened? So it was a horrible story until they finally got divorced. It cost them a huge amount of money they didn't have. The point is, had somebody said to the people inquiring about this guy, "Listen, stay away from him. He has problems," then she wouldn't have gone through the tragedy that she went through. So this is a practical question. When someone calls you up and they ask you for a reference about somebody, now here too, in the modern world, references are a big problem. Somebody calls me about a person for a teaching job, and I know that this person was chronically late and didn't always prepare his lessons, and he sometimes spoke roughly to the kids. And somebody called me for a reference for this guy, and I can be very honest, but I can say it in such a way that this guy wouldn't be hired for this particular position. Now that's one thing. In the business world, however, if you give a negative report, you lose. They can sue you for falsehoods or misrep, whatever it might be. And therefore, most businesses, their what do they call it? The HR office will tell you if you're called for a reference, you can simply say he was prompt, he showed up for work on time, and that's about it. You can't say anything negative because he can come back to you. So here in the modern business world, if you tell the truth, it can harm you. So
Rabbi?
there's a very, very delicate balances here. Yes.
I just want to say one thing with all due respect to, great Rabbanim and well-known people. The ikar is that each person is a person. And no matter what kind of Talmid Chacham, unfortunately, throughout the world, not just in the Jewish world, we have all seen people who we think are supposed to be and have always been role models get in a lot of trouble. And I one of the things that blew my mind years ago was a mikvah lady had gone, this was from the Elizabeth, New Jersey mikvah, had gone to this big conference that was held for Rabbanim, mikvah ladies, Rebbitzin, some others. And one of the most amazing things that I heard was that they were told, because a mikvah lady, is very aware of the woman's body, and said that if a woman starts opening up about chas v'shalom, these bruises, I didn't fall down steps, or something like from my husband, that unfortunately the tendency is, oh, it can't be, your husband is like, so important in the business world or so important in this. And they emphasized that no matter who this woman is married to, you have to take her claim seriously, and it has to be pursued. And I think too many times things are pushed under the rug because, it will damage the shidduch for siblings, or it's not good for the image of the shul, or whatever. And I think bottom line is, we're not the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We are just a human being. And I think that very often gets overlooked.
You're absolutely right. And this is why in recent times, more and more posts are coming out to advocate for mikvah ladies, bringing this to the attention of Rabbanim. If people know about a situation, again, you try to avoid divorce whenever possible. However, if there are legitimate situations where if a husband chas v'shalom beats a wife, this is not acceptable. It may be shameful, but it's not acceptable. And it was a big machlokas not too many years ago about whether this should be reported to the police or not. And in many communities, the rabbi said, no, we'll handle it ourselves, which means that they'll support the husband, which was wrong. And Rav Shechter and others have come out very strongly against this. If there's a situation like that, you may 100%, you should, it's a mitzvah to go to the police and report this type of activity. But unfortunately, in some situations, it doesn't always happen. That's very sad. I remember in the early 70s, there was a big nursing home scandal, and many of the owners of nursing homes were prominent Rabbanim who were found guilty of stealing all kinds of Medicare funds. It was a horrible, horrible situation. They went to jail. Whenever I see pictures in the paper of somebody accused of some kind of white-collar crime, it sends shudders up my spine, because they're pictured in the paper with the beard and payas and the big hat. And so one prominent guy who was really, really in all the headlines for the terrible things he did in nursing homes, gets out of jail, and he was at a hotel for Shabbat. I was at the same hotel for a conference, and they gave him all kinds of kibbutim. They gave him shlishi for an aliyah. I just don't understand how that works. So clearly, mitzvah sheker tirchak is a very, very important mitzvah, and I don't understand how people can, just consciously avoid observing what is a mitzvah min Torah. Mipnei darkei shalom, to promote peace. It is not promoting peace if the woman is still going to suffer, if her husband beats her, or if a child is suffering from other. It's not shalom in that sense. It may be shalom in terms of the reputation of the person who's doing it, but in a situation when a person is doing something inappropriate, he has to be called out for it. And being quiet is wrong. Yes.
Unfortunately, a lot of people are concerned, where are you going? Are you going into Lashon Hara or not? So people play it safe. They're afraid of, but unfortunately, the truth has to be told.
No, but it's not, again, people who hide behind, oh, it's Lashon Hara, halavai, they were that careful about other areas of Lashon Hara as well. It's
right. Exactly.
It's a double-edged sword. This is Lashon Hara, I can't do that. But in the meantime, they'll be involved in other kinds of Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is like a bag of feathers. Once you release it into the wind, you can't stuff it back in again. It just doesn't happen. And it's an important mitzvah. The Gemara wrestles with it. And if it is really for shalom, in the case of a bride, if it's really, and especially when in dealing with children and in family relations, you have to be brutally honest. And you have to look out for kavod habrios, how a person is treated. If a person is mistreated, he has to be called out for it. And there's the Gemara is very strict in taking an approach towards lying. You can't tell an actual lie. You can't even be a passive participant in forms of dishonesty. So tirchak means distance yourself from the lies beyond actually telling the lies. But there are certain sigyos which would allow you to bend it, but within very, very limited parameters. So hopefully we shall go forth and be honest in all our personal and business dealings, and there will be ultimately Shalom al Yisrael. Nobody will suffer.
Amen.
Wally,
Yes.
but we do see, even with Abraham and Sarah, right? The lie the lie of omission that Hashem said and what was omitted for Shalom by its purposes.
Yeah, so the Mefarshim struggle with that. They struggle with that tremendously. And they try to suggest that maybe she was his, in the ancient Near East, relatives were sometimes called sister, and he didn't, and they were related, so.
I'm talking about when they said about not having children. Hashem said, and then it was repeated, and it was only half of it was said.
Yeah, the Mefarshim struggle with that. The Mefarshim struggle with many things.
No, but sometimes I think if it's going to lead to a big fight, just omitting something, sometimes I think, especially between a husband and a wife, and especially if it involves the kids, it can lead to a blow-up fight. That sometimes a lie by omission. Sometimes I think what you're stopping to have happen is a much better thing not to let it happen than to lie, especially of omission.
I would agree, and that would be the lesser of two evils, for sure. For sure. Any other comments?
Have a great Shabbos.
Amen.
Before everybody goes, wish my father a happy birthday. Today's his birthday.
Oh,
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dina.
Happy birthday.
Happy
Thank you.
Ad May Ave Stream.
Amazing.